Mr. Ron Oberts, President of OCI, could not be present today, and on his behalf, I welcome you all to this very informative webinar on opportunities in India's nuclear energy market. This webinar is organized by OCI in cooperation with Amritt Inc. For those who are not OCI members, OCI is a premier organization of some 170 Canadian-based companies that supply nuclear components and services to the nuclear plants in Canada and worldwide. Presentation will be given by Mr. Gunjan Bagla and Mr. Dinesh Lal of Amritt Inc. Mr. Bagla is the founder and managing director of Amritt Inc., which is the India country liaison for Nuclear Infrastructure Council, USA. Mr. Bagla is the author of a book on doing business in 21st century India and has written several articles on nuclear opportunities in India, which are published in Business Week and Nuclear Engineering International. He has traveled to India as part of Nuclear Energy Trade Mission and was selected to President Obama's executive mission to India. Mr. Dinesh Lal is a mechanical engineering graduate from MIT. He is a senior advisor of Amritt Inc. He has worked for 20 years in management in Larsen & Toubro, which is India's top supplier of nuclear component and services to all nuclear power plants in India. Mr. Lal has visited many reactor sites in India with Amritt Inc.'s clients, and he maintains an ongoing interaction with NPCIL executives. Thank you. Now I pass it on to Mr. Bagla to continue with the seminar. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Bob, and thanks to the organization of Can-Do Industries for co-hosting this webinar. We have attendees today from all over Canada, and then some attendees from the United States as well as a few from Europe have joined in as well. So good morning or good afternoon to all of you. We asked each of you to fill out a questionnaire before you registered on the website, and I want to give you a couple of data points from that questionnaire just so that it sets the expectations of the audience. Most of you said that you are exporting your products and services. And most of you said you are exporting to more than 2 countries. So that's the kind of general audience we will be aiming our discussion at. And most of you said that you have spent a little bit of time in India on business, but perhaps no more than 10 or 12 days. Very few have spent more than 30 days, and many of you have never been to India. Most of the attendees also said that exports constitute at least 10% of their business. A few said that exports are as high as 50% of their business. So that's roughly the composition of the audience. I'm going to ask you some questions as we go along during our discussion to make this interactive. I also encourage you to send in questions for us, for Dinesh and me, through the question applet. A few of you have already done that, and I encourage others to do that at any point within the presentation. You can send questions to us. We will take a couple of breaks during the webinar to be able to answer some of these questions, and then we'll catch the rest at the end. If there are more questions than we can handle during the webinar, we will send you answers by email, and so we will be as available as possible to you. So let's just start with a sense of why does this matter. And let me start with what's happening today. So Australia, for example, has been opposed to doing nuclear trade with India for many years. And last year, its Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, made an about turn in her policy and decided that Australia would be willing to export uranium to India. India has substantial uranium mines, but not enough to supply its nuclear plants. So it's very much dependent on the global supply of uranium. The Prime Minister of South Australia, along with Julia Gillard, will be visiting India in October. And one of the key items on their agenda is the discussion about nuclear trade. Likewise, the Canadian Foreign Minister, John Baird, is due to be in New Delhi and Bombay in just a few weeks. And this is supposed to be a precursor to another visit by Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, which may happen as early as November or December this year. So there's a lot of activity from the international front focused on India. 2012 has also been a momentous year in India's nuclear ecosystem. For the first time in about 4 years, it got a new secretary for the Department of Atomic Energy. R.K. Sinha, who hails from the Indian state of Bihar, has taken over that role from Dr. Banerjee. And the primary nuclear utility that you will be concerned about in India is called the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, NPCIL. NPCIL had a long-standing chairman and managing director, Dr. S.K. Jain, who finally retired, and Mr. Purohit, K.C. Purohit, took over his role just a couple of months ago. India has been in the news in another way that I'm sure all of you have seen in the last few weeks when there was an unprecedented outage which Western media reported put about 600 million Indians in darkness for 2 separate occasions within the course of a week. And that really underscored the need for better electrical energy infrastructure in India. Nuclear infrastructure is a key part of that success for India. And I've got a summary here of some of the big things that India is planning. Today, India produces under 5,000 megawatts of power using nuclear energy. So it's a fairly small portion of their overall production. Their plan is to go up to 30,000 megawatts by 2030. Now, India is a free market democracy, but they do follow some of the vestiges of Soviet-style planning, and in their planned economy, they go through this process of 5-year plans. The current 5-year plan just came into being this year. It goes from 2012 to 2017, and during that period, India has committed to $40 billion of new investment in the nuclear energy infrastructure. Some of this will come from the government, some will come from equity, some will be raised as debt, and some is expected to be funded by some of the larger partners from overseas making loans of some kind. I've got a summary of some of the things that are going to come up. 8 heavy water reactors, 4 light water reactors expected to be of American technology. The assumption is this will be GE Westinghouse combination. Areva is expected to win business with its EPR, and the Russians are doing well, which I'll talk about later on as well. Now, this does not include India's strategic initiatives towards the fast breeder projects, which I won't really be talking about because they are not available for foreign companies to collaborate on. The long-term plan that India has is to try and leverage its vast reserves of thorium, and that probably will not produce commercial nuclear energy for at least 20 or 30 years. So again, I don't think most of you in this audience are willing to wait that long for a commercial opportunity, and so we are not going to be talking about those as well. Our focus is going to be what are the opportunities for overseas companies to profit from India today, and to lay out a roadmap as to how you might do so. And the answers might surprise some of you on the phone as to the way that we think you should approach this. Now, we get asked whenever we have conversations about this, we get asked about the impact of Fukushima's accident in India. Within 60 days of the events in Japan, the Indian Commerce Minister, Anand Sharma, was in Washington, D.C., and he made an unequivocal statement that India's nuclear energy resolve is undeterred. That we will carry on our plan as scheduled. Now, they are, of course, performing additional safety checks, and the IAEA has been in India this month looking at the Rajasthan plant to see whether there is additional safety measures they need to take. So they're doing that, but they're not slowing down the development of the new infrastructure. And so in the free world today, India is probably unique in the sense that it is going forward with a very aggressive plan to develop nuclear energy. Now, what I'd like to do at this stage is see if I can run an interactive poll and understand a little bit more about the audience here. So I'm going to ask you a question that should appear on your screen, and I'd like you to take a second to answer it. Does everybody see the poll now? What might be our biggest long-term obstacle? So take a moment, please, to answer the question, and it's just your guess. There's no right or wrong answer.
All three? Or government's agreement? I don't know how it works. What do we do?
You just select one point on the poll and answer it, and Bob and team, you don't have to answer it if you don't want to. That's fine.
No, but we might, some of them. How do we answer it? Like we click on that?
Yes.
But it's nothing, it's not giving any response when I click on something.
Okay. It's possible that you are, as a panelist, you are unable to answer the question. That may be the case.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Okay. So the attendees are answering. We have almost 90% of the audience who has answered the question. I'm going to close the poll in a moment. And this is also a good time for you to send in questions over the question applet within the GoToMeeting application. All right. So I'm going to close the poll. It seems like 30% of you believe that your government's agreements with the Indian government are the holdback, and 70% of you believe that your understanding of India's decision-making process is the holdback. Only 10% believe that the Indian customer's ability is the holdback. 5% are saying other. So let me close the poll. And let me see if I can share the results. You should see the results on your screen. Okay. Now this is very encouraging to us because often we do not see such a high visibility for the factor relating to the understanding of India's decision-making process. Dinesh and I are going to try and answer some of the aspects of India's decision-making process today. Some of the answers, like I said, may surprise you, but India works in its own manner, and the more you know about it, the better you will do. So I'm going to hide the poll and move on here to the next slide. Everybody should now see the slide that says, why should I worry? And some of the factors that come into play is, before you can start to gain revenue from that $40 billion opportunity, is that the governments within both countries and the bureaucracies within the Nuclear Power Commission and the Western companies need to understand each other and need to start playing. And so there's a lot of preparatory work that needs to happen. Another important factor is that it may take considerable time before you get the first piece of revenue, and predicting that time can be a frustrating experience for those who are not used to dealing with India. A unique factor in the nuclear ecosystem, and it is illustrated by the photographs on this page. You see that the presidents of Korea, Canada, the Prime Minister of Canada, the Vladimir Putin, who's been both the Prime Minister and President, and from Russia, as well as Barack Obama, have been in India. And high on the agenda for each of them has been the subject of nuclear energy collaboration and the availability of business opportunities for the companies or organizations from their countries. one of my friends was looking at these photographs and was saying that perhaps the way to succeed in getting revenue from India is to make sure that when they take your photograph, that you are on the right side of the photograph as Vladimir Putin is, since he's the only one so far whose country has got substantial revenue. I'm not sure whether that is the case or not, but that was certainly an observation from these photos. There are many other countries that are playing in the India market that we've listed. But as many of you already realize, one of the key barriers to having success in India is being unprepared, or in some cases being ill-advised. So your ability to understand how India functions is going to be key to your success. And I'm glad that most of you in this audience are already sensitized to that. But what I'd like to do now is to invite my colleague, Mr. Dinesh Lal, to say a few words about the time that he has spent in one of India's largest nuclear establishments in Rajasthan. Dinesh, can you share some of your experience from there?
I think most of India's nuclear power plants, the one in Rajasthan is located far away from any centers of population, and it's a little difficult to get at. There's no train service that you can use for getting to the site location. You have to fly to Delhi, take a train to a place called Jaipur, and then take a car from there all the way to the station, to the power plant, which is a trip of about maybe 2.5 hours. As far as the people running the plant are concerned, they're very receptive to new technologies, but they are probably in the state where they don't quite know exactly what they can do and what they cannot do. So if you propose something to them, it's likely to take some time before they're able to sort it through their system and decide whether they want to adopt that technology or not. I found the technologies that they are using are, particularly for control and monitoring systems, are probably 15 or 20 years behind what they are in the US and probably some of the other advanced countries. The people are very easy to deal with. They're very hospitable. They've been out of touch with the world for probably about 25 years. So they're very anxious to hear what you have to say. But how fast they will respond to you is something that depends on the situation at the moment. Would you like to add to this, Gunjan?
I think that's a terrific overview. The first trip that Dinesh made with one of our clients to Rajasthan happened to be in the dead of summer, and the low temperatures in Rajasthan, in the Rajasthan desert, can be about 35 degrees centigrade. So it is like being in an oven, and so you have to brace yourself for that if you do travel at an inopportune time of the year. The plants are located across the country, and you'll get to see a map later on. So let me move on. Very briefly about Amritt. Again, Bob introduced us, so I won't dwell on this. But our core business is helping Western companies to deal with India. We don't work with Indian clients. We have people on the ground in India, such as Dinesh, who's based in India. And we have many other senior people on the ground there. We are a California company, so if you sign an agreement with us, you're really signing with a US advisor or US company. Bob mentioned my book on doing business in India. That is still at the top of the Amazon list in terms of ratings on doing business in India books. And yesterday there was an article in the Harvard Business Review. If you Google my name with the word Harvard Business Review, you'll see a short article that I wrote that just appeared yesterday on the PHWR website. But let me move on from there and give you a little bit of history. It's important to understand history when you deal with India, and particularly in India's nuclear ecosystem. So India became a country in 1947. Even before that happened, the people who were going to lead in India were very conscious of atomic energy. And one of the revered figures in India is Dr. Homi J. Bhabha, who was a fellow of the Royal Society, educated in the West, and shortly after India became independent, he was appointed the chairman of India's Atomic Energy Commission. The Atomic Energy Commission reported directly to the Prime Minister's office, not to any of the ministries. And this continues to this day. There are only two departments really that report directly into the Prime Minister. One is the Department of Space, that is responsible for the satellite and manned launches. And then the second is the Department of Atomic Energy. Now, our co-hosts are the Organization of Can-Do Industries, so I think it's important to emphasize that one of the first countries to want to collaborate with India was Canada, and AECL signed an agreement with India going all the way back to 1963 around the heavy water technology. Shortly after that, General Electric signed an agreement to supply 2 boiling water reactors that are still functional in the city of Tarapur, a couple of hours away from Mumbai. They are fairly small reactors, and they've been going for about 40 years. So when you visit the nuclear energy infrastructure or their headquarters in India, you will still see people talking very fondly about the influence that Dr. Bhabha had on India's nuclear future. And he died in an untimely accident in an airplane accident in Europe in the mid-60s. The growth of the nuclear infrastructure in India has been marked with many ups and downs. In 1973, the first heavy water reactor was made operational at the site that Dinesh just spoke about. It's about a 100 megawatt reactor called RAPS-1, the Rajasthan Atomic Power Station 1, that was built with Canadian help. And they were in the process of building what was going to be called RAPS-2, when on May 18th, 1974, headlines all over the world read that India has conducted its first nuclear test, also in the Rajasthan desert. India's claim at that time was that this was a peaceful nuclear test, although the rest of the world wondered what a peaceful application of a nuclear test might be, and it was considered quite controversial at the time. The immediate reaction worldwide was of condemning India. And shortly after that, in 1975, the so-called NSG was formed. One of the primary purposes of the nuclear supplier groups was to try and ensure that countries such as India were denied nuclear technology and were excluded from nuclear commerce of any kind. This certainly slowed down India's nuclear energy development, and RAPS-2 did not become operational for another 6 years. India decided to go on its own and continue to complete the heavy water project to build RAPS-2, and then proceeded in a vigorous manner to build as many more heavy water reactors that they can. They don't call this technology in India Can-Do anymore. They call it Indian PHWR, but it's largely based on and inspired by the same kind of approach that the Can-Do technology uses. So let's fast forward to 1998. By this time, the Department of Atomic Energy had been split between the commercial aspects, which was called Nuclear Power Corporation of India, and that was a utility, and the so-called strategic part, which is India's military efforts towards nuclear power. And in 1998, the BJP government was in power, and on May 11th, they chose to conduct a second series of tests. It was a package of 5 tests conducted at almost the same location, Pokhran in the Rajasthan desert. You might remember that this was followed within a few weeks by similar tests being conducted in the neighboring country of Pakistan. The Clinton administration clamped down with sanctions, and so did much of the rest of the world. And so this slowed down the development of nuclear and defense infrastructure in India for some time, but not for long. In 2000, President Clinton made a historic visit to India. And in 2001, when President Bush was elected to office, the events of 9/11 suddenly cast the US-India relationship into a very different light. Right after 9/11, Washington realized that India was going to need to be a strategic ally in the war on terror, and everything else became secondary. So the Bush administration rapidly set about finding ways that they could collaborate more vigorously with India. And in Washington in July 2005, when Prime Minister Singh visited Washington, D.C., President Bush announced, along with Prime Minister Singh, that they were going to work vigorously to try and get the nuclear sanctions dismantled and to enable collaboration and cooperation for nuclear energy infrastructure. It was a very complex and challenging agreement that really challenged both the American and the Indian sides. In 2008, Prime Minister Singh took the risk of his government's own survival. There was a no confidence motion in the Indian Parliament because both the extreme left and the extreme right were opposed to the agreement in India for their own reasons. They survived the no confidence vote and approved the nuclear agreement. But then there was a crisis on the American side with the financial situation in September 2008. And in the heat and the midst of all of those bank bailouts and the tremendous amount of problems going on in September 2008, both the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives passed the nuclear agreement with overwhelming majority. The picture I have on the top is one of my favorite photographs that's in the White House, and President Bush is mobbed by Indian Americans who had worked hard to get that agreement through. And it was considered a historic victory for the President and Condoleezza Rice and his administration to be able to negotiate that. So I'm going to talk now about some of the customers in India, but before we go there, let me see if we can take a look at one of the other poll questions. Okay. So the question that I'm asking you is, what might be the role of a partner in India? If you can take a moment to answer. And again, there's no right or wrong answer. I see that most of you have answered, but there are a few stragglers, so I'll wait for a minute. Okay, I am going to close the polls and share the result. You should see the result on your screen now. 80% of you believe that the partner will be your local in-country eyes and ears, and we would certainly agree with that. About 25% believes that this will be someone who can enable you to win the first deal, and I'll address that point in a moment. Some of you are looking for a financial partner in a joint venture, and that would make a lot of sense if you are going to be doing some manufacturing in India, or if you're a service company and you need some work done locally in India, so you can partner with someone there. So that makes sense. A few of you are saying that you don't need a partner, and India is one of the countries that you can go into India without a partner. So, when we take on a new client to work with India's nuclear infrastructure, this is something we look at closely. In many countries such as China and Russia and so on, it's almost required that you have a partner. We find that in India, there are many occasions when people think they need a partner, but a partner is not really going to be that much value, or they need to go through the pain themselves of understanding how India functions, and a partner might slow that down. So this is something we look at very closely. This is an important part of our consulting process and our advice process to determine who needs a partner and what the partner's role should be. One of the things we do discourage is to think about the partner as someone short-term, that you simply want to be able to work with them to get 1 or 2 deals and then you will cut them out and move on your own. The history of success of those types of relationships in India is very limited because the partners are not stupid. They realize what's going on and they adjust their behavior accordingly. If they don't see something long-term for themselves, it's going to affect the way that they function. And this is more true, I think, in India than other countries. So we really like to align both short-term and long-term goals for our clients. And the right answer really depends on your particular situation and your business and who's available to partner. What is unlikely, and both Dinesh and I started our careers at Larsen & Toubro, so we can say this with some degree of confidence, that for most of you, chances are that Larsen & Toubro is probably not the right partner, not because it's not a fine company, it is, it's one of the most respected companies in India, but simply because it is so large and so well entrenched in India that there is not a matching between their interests and your interests in many cases. And so we often look beyond our former employer to be able to find the right partnerships for you in India. So let me talk a little bit now about the people who might be your customers in India. The nuclear power production is largely within the realm of one entity. There's a small footnote to that I'll get to, but one entity, the Nuclear Power Corporation of India. 100% of its shares are owned by the Indian Department of Atomic Energy. They've got about 13,000 employees, and virtually everybody who works there in any kind of technical or management role has never worked for any other company. They hire a lot of people fresh out of college, put them through a 1-year special training program. It used to be called the Bhabha Atomic Research Center or BARC training program, and now NPCIL runs their own separate training program. Most of these individuals are very passionate and dedicated to nuclear energy. The aftermath of these nuclear agreements that have taken place are transforming the organization in a way that most of them have not seen within their career. Since starting in 1974, they have not been really able to interact with any foreign country with the limited exception of Russia. And so this is causing a step change in the way that the organization is structured, and it will go forward. For some of you, NPCIL will not be the client or the customer. There are other public sector undertakings. The nuclear fuel complex is where India processes the uranium. The Uranium Corporation of India Limited is the organization responsible for mining, for exploring as well as mining for the iron ore, for the uranium ore, within the country. The Electronics Corporation of India Limited, ECIL, is also a government-owned company. They used to do all kinds of things related to electronics, but today they work almost exclusively in the area of nuclear energy for controls and instrumentation, and some work in defense. Now, one of the largest public sector undertakings in India is called Bharat Heavy Electricals, BHEL. They make the turbines, the generators, the switchgear, and they sell to many different industries, but certainly nuclear energy is a big part of it. I'm sorry, I did not open the slides for you to look at. You should be able to see the background slide at this moment that I was addressing. So I've talked about the Nuclear Power Corporation. I've talked about the other government entities, and there's certainly private enterprise such as Larsen & Toubro, and there's a whole slew of other companies that are providing services as well as products into the nuclear infrastructure, because India has not been able to import anything for a number of years. There is one other nuclear utility in India, but it's not really available for you to participate in, and it is the one that runs India's fast breeder reactor called Bhavini. And I won't address that anymore. I just wanted, for completeness, to mention that they are also a player. Now, Dinesh, this might be a good time to talk a little bit about the time that you and I have spent at NPCIL headquarters in Anushakti Nagar outside of Mumbai. Can you share an anecdote or two about your time there?
Well, again, it's the headquarters are the place where most decisions are taken about operations, they have a bifurcation between the operation of the plant and the kind of decisions that are taken at the headquarters. There's a financial limitation in the sense that people at the plant are allowed to take decisions up to a certain level, which is not extremely high. But all major decisions concerning investments or modifications to the plant or introduction of technology are generally taken at the headquarters. And again, the people at NPCIL headquarters are very receptive, very open to new technology, very hospitable. It's not difficult to get appointments to meet the right people. But again, to sell a particular technology or sell a particular concept to them takes a number of meetings, and meeting not with just one person, meeting with people from across departments. I generally found all the people that I met at NPCIL very, very easy to get along with. Both they're very hardworking. You can meet them till they're willing to meet with you at their office till late in the evening. They're willing to start early in the morning, have conversations with US-based companies which are 12 hours, which have a time difference of 12 hours from them at 5 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. But again, it's a question of to get a serious decision out of them, it takes a lot of effort. Would you like to add to that, Gunjan?
I would echo everything you said, and I think one of the things you will find with Indian government entities, remember all of these people are government employees. So largely you want to meet them at their offices. The idea of let's go to lunch or dinner and meet off-site is, as particularly as a foreign company, is not something that their internal affairs people look very kindly at. So in the beginning you certainly don't want to suggest that. You will also find that
sorry to the offices and plants are normally located a little distance from the city, and they're quite self-contained. So if you have to go out for lunch, they normally organize it for you in their own cafeteria.
That's absolutely right. Yes. So the other thing you will find is that it is almost it's extremely rare that an executive will meet you alone. They want to have their colleagues in the room with them. Sometimes it's just to make sure that there's, that the air is clear. And sometimes it's to make sure that their colleagues are taking notes and that the discussions are transparent and open. They are very conscious of not being in a situation where someone can say that they were unduly influenced by any supplier, particularly by a foreign supplier. So this is something that they generally will not bring up on their own, but you need to be aware of that and to respect that. Typically, you go through some significant security process. You've got to have the right kind of visa before you go in and so on. And we can talk more about that, on an individual basis as people plan their trips. But it does take some preparation. You simply can't drop in on NPCIL because you happen to be in India. If you're on the wrong kind of visa, they won't see you. If you're not fully prepared and debriefed, they will not see you. So there's a process you have to follow. But as Dinesh said, it's been very easy for us to set up those meetings. What I'm doing now is looking over some of the questions that came in to see if some are appropriate to answer right now. So somebody is asking how many nuclear plants are operational in India currently. There's about 20 of them, and I have a map or a display that shows them later. It's a question from John. And the other questions, I'm just cherry picking some questions right now and we'll take the rest later. How large a role does localization play in being successful in India, as such as it is in China? How are localization requirements determined? I think that's an important question to address at this point. So India has, for new reactor construction, India has targets on the price per kilowatt hour. And that's what they're shooting for. They don't really care where the equipment comes from, whether it's built in India or the US or China. As long as you can provide, as a reactor maker, you can provide them a complete system that produces power at a certain price, they are happy with it. Within nuclear infrastructure, they have not placed limits on domestic content that you've got to produce a certain amount within the country. Nuclear energy isn't a way for India to create jobs in India in terms of the employment in nuclear construction or nuclear manufacturing. That's not what they are looking for. Their real goal is to increase the amount of nuclear energy produced and make it produced at a reasonable price to the Indian customer. So they are, in that sense, perhaps they are more flexible than the Chinese and other governments might be. They are also, very much conscious about overall value. So in many cases, you will be driven to do things within country, but not because the government requires it as a condition of doing business. Okay, so let me move on, and we'll try and address the other questions later on. So some of the visible obstacles that we all recognize relate to the agreements. Many of you raised that in the early questions. Canada has yet to sign the final agreement with India, and we hope that Foreign Minister Baird, when he visits India next month, and perhaps when Stephen Harper goes to India, that this will get sorted out. I am told there's just one or two snags in this agreement process. Canada would be a natural partner to India, given the long history of collaboration in the past, and given the fact that India's infrastructure today is largely heavy water technology. Now, many of you are saying, well, let's wait until the agreement is signed before we do anything. Our point at Amritt is that for many of you, that's probably not the best thing to do. Many of these other processes take time, and you want to start building your relationships. You want to start understanding the decision-making process. Many companies are already doing so. If you wait until the agreement is signed, you will be at the tail end of a long queue when you try to get inside Anushakti Nagar and have those conversations. So our clients are moving forward with these discussions on an ongoing basis. There are other legal requirements that I won't get into. Most of you have been exporting for a while, so you know that your governments may require certain licenses. There is one Indian side that I do want to mention. As part of the agreement, some of the nuclear sites are open for global commerce, whereas others, the so-called non-safeguarded sites, are not. So as you begin to engage with India, it's important that you focus only on the safeguarded sites. And all of our clients who work with us are guided only towards the safeguarded sites. India is committed by a certain point to really release most of its sites to become safeguarded. So this is a moving target, but there's plenty of business to be had at the safeguarded sites today. Now, some of the commercial concerns that are holding people back, particularly the large reactor makers, is that India, the foreign governments advised India to alter its liability laws to become in line with global recommendations, and the Indian Parliament took that up in the summer of 2010 and passed a law that from their perspective meets global standards. However, there has been a concern on the part of GE, Westinghouse, and to some extent Areva and the Russians as well, that the full liability is not being channeled to the nuclear energy operator, and some of the liability may stay back with the equipment maker. This is not something that the NPCIL executives are comfortable with either. They'd much rather be completely aligned with the global standards. They are going to need insurance for the plants to operate, and particularly in the light of Fukushima. So we expect these issues to sort themselves out. The most powerful companies in this industry, GE, Westinghouse, Areva, are working hard to make this happen. So for most of you on this call, we think that is a factor, but it's a background factor. And we believe that the biggest opportunities for you today lie in the existing plant infrastructure, the 20 reactors that I talked about. And as long as you can provide value for money, you can provide security of supply, you can provide some understanding of how you will fulfill their needs, we think that there are conversations to be had in India today that will produce value for you. More important, I think, are the invisible obstacles. Winning the trust of the executives at NPCIL and the government bureaucrats at the Department of Atomic Energy. This is where, when Dinesh and I talk privately with the folks at NPCIL and within the Indian government infrastructure, because we are both of Indian origin and spend considerable time with them, they will share with us some of their misgivings. And this is where we think that many Western companies falter. Today, I would say that the Russians are definitely in the lead in terms of getting revenue from India, and perhaps the French are close behind, with Areva expected to sign a contract for the Jaitapur facility, which will ultimately become one of the largest nuclear power producing facilities in the world. Other countries, other companies are definitely further behind, and we think that a lot of it has to do with understanding and overcoming the invisible obstacles, getting over the cross-cultural barriers. They will speak English to you when you go to NPCIL, but that doesn't mean that they think American or that they think Canadian. Dinesh and I work closely with our Western clients in order to be able to enable them to understand how to think Indian, if you will. And this can be the subject of a webinar of its own, but I just wanted to highlight it. I think many of you are already sensitized to this issue. So here is that map of the atomic energy establishments in India. It's probably too small for you to see the details here. I'm happy to send a copy of this map to anybody who requests it by email. My email will be listed at the end of the session. But India today has about 20 working reactors. Rajasthan had a new one come up soon, and the Russian reactor in Kudankulam, all the way in the south of India here, the fuel is being loaded in that reactor. It should start producing power later this year. A second Russian VVER reactor should be up early next year. There's a fast breeder reactor that I mentioned is not really available for Western companies to collaborate on, but a 540 megawatt reactor is being built in the town of Kalpakkam, south of Chennai. India's largest site is Rawat in Rajasthan, the one that Dinesh talked about first. There are sites in Kakrapar and Kaiga and Narora, and I won't point them all out, but there's a considerable amount of activity. And we think that for most of you today, the big opportunities lie in the current infrastructure, which has not been able to use foreign technology for almost 40 years. And there are surely things that you can offer to help them improve that, and that's where we think that the short-term opportunity lies as opposed to the new build. So let's talk a little bit about the new build. It's a very aggressive plan. The heavy water reactor construction will continue. India is building new reactors at a number of its existing sites, such as Kakrapar and Rajasthan. It is designated several additional inland sites for the heavy water reactor construction, where Canadian companies in particular should have a role. The new light water reactors are typically being built along the coast, so that the very heavy vessels that are required can be transported using barges and so on. And of course, they have a greater concern now regarding tsunami protection and so on. India is also an active seismic area, so they are going to, they're very much concerned about reinforcing the sites against both the hazards of hurricanes and tsunamis, as well as seismic hazards. And these are all opportunities for Western companies, and that's why I'm mentioning them. The light water reactor plants are listed at the bottom of this slide. Two have been designated for American technology, one in the region of Methi Vardi in the western Indian state of Gujarat, and one in the southeastern state of Andhra Pradesh in a town called Kovada. The French have been assigned a site called Jaitapur in Maharashtra, and that's a little further along than the American conversations. The Russians are already building two plants that I said, and the site in Kudankulam can take up to 10 reactors. The Russians may also build another location in in West Bengal, although its location has come into a little bit of question because of domestic Indian politics. So there's a lot of activity going on, and these are slightly longer term opportunities, I would say. So the question for you is, should you pursue the India opportunity? And I would say for many of you on the phone, this is a good question to ask. It's probably not the right opportunity for every one of you on the phone. But for those of you whom it is the right opportunity, generally the answer is that you should start sooner rather than later. Don't wait for the final agreement to be signed before you start looking at this. Don't wait for your worldwide partner to lead you in there. Don't wait for the Indians to come to you looking for business. They're certainly being overwhelmed with interest from the rest of the world. So you really need to get prepared, and you need to prepare your business plans and figure out when you can get the first revenue and when you can build a profitable stream. Many companies will profit from India in a big way. Some will fail, and for some it's not the right place to go. And these are things that we can discuss much more on a one-on-one basis. So if you do get started, our advice is that you don't go alone. Find somebody who can guide you. It doesn't have to be Amritt. There are other companies who can do this as well. I talked about the partnership idea already, that you may or may not need a partner. But one thing you do need to keep in mind, that other than the really big guys, the GEs and the Westinghouses, it's not really big bang approach that works in India. We encourage our clients to go make some small victories. Get a small piece of revenue. Maybe you don't get profit, but at least you get some revenue. And you have an understanding of how India functions. And then you can start to make the bigger investments. You can take the bigger risks and go for the bigger rewards. So that, I would, again, there are exceptions to this. But for many of our clients, and for many of you on the phone, that is usually a more sensible approach than laying all your bets in one big basket. Now, for some of you, that isn't possible at all, given the nature of your business, and so you certainly, we certainly understand that. But where possible, try to parse out the risk and the reward and get some small victories. So that's the end of the formal presentation. My email address is listed there if you'd like a copy of the slides, or if you'd like a separate copy of that map, which is hard to see in the slides. We'll be happy to send those to you. I'm going to switch now to the Q&A session and bring up all of the questions and see which ones we can answer. So give me a second. Samuel wanted to know whether the presentation is downloadable, and as I said, we can email the presentation to those of you who request it. Send us an email with your business address and your phone number, and we will get the presentation out to you within the next couple of days. Andrew has a question about the nuclear liability law, and I'll try and answer that, but keep in mind that we are not attorneys and we cannot give you legal advice. So what we are telling you is more from a commercial business angle, and before you make any decisions, you should consult the appropriate attorneys. We can find you the right attorneys in India if you need to speak with them. But his question is, particularly for American companies, do we expect that law to evolve in the next few years, perhaps to be more in line with the expectations of exporters of nuclear equipment? So, yes, I would think that the law will evolve. The best example of future behavior in India is to look at past behavior. And since there hasn't been nuclear commerce in the past, the closest analog to that is the defense infrastructure in India and the way defense laws have evolved. So 10 years ago, it was very hard for American and foreign companies to do business in the defense ecosystem in India. And the Russians were getting most of the business. Some European countries were winning. Israel had zero business, and the US had almost zero business. Well, today, the US and Israel have become among India's largest suppliers, with the exception of Russia. And very soon, America will be India's largest defense supplier. This has happened because India has made many changes in their rules, in their offset regimes, and in the way that they perceive doing business with the West. We think that a similar revolution will happen as India goes to seek major amounts of funding on the debt markets for nuclear construction. Out of that 40 billion, India is going to raise about a third of it on the debt markets. Most of that will happen overseas because India's internal debt markets are not that liquid. And so when you go out to raise $13 or $14 billion, the creditors are going to want to ask some of these same questions, and we expect that the Indian government will find ways to start to become more in line with global standards. So it's not something that we want our Western clients to slow down on as a result of these liability laws. Clearly, you want to get legal advice before you sign a contract, but it's something that you definitely want to continue to watch and pursue. I hope that answers Andrew's question. Jim has a question about India's heavy water supply. So today, most of India's plants run on heavy water, and India needed to develop the ability to produce heavy water on its own. It has the ability to produce the deuterium oxide in multiple locations, and currently it feels that its manufacturing capacity is sufficient for today's needs. Now keep in mind that they are building 8 new 700 megawatt plants with heavy water technology. So they will certainly have the need to expand that capacity. And if you can offer heavy water production in a manner that is superior to what they are doing, certainly you will get a willing ear. Will it be a piece of cake? Can you just go in there, make a presentation, and come back with an order? No, absolutely not. But it's certainly a discussion that we would encourage, and it's a path that is certainly not closed in India. They're very much objectively driven. They're all engineers. They understand what superior technology is all about, and that's what they're really looking for. There's a question about the storage and disposal of spent nuclear fuel. So what India has done so far, from what I understand, is that they don't transport the nuclear fuel away from the plants. Now, most of the plants, as you know, are heavy water plants and are running on natural uranium. The boiling water reactors take enriched uranium, and of course, all the new light water reactor plants will take the enriched uranium as well. But so far, they are storing the spent nuclear fuel within the nuclear parks themselves. They are not transporting or building a central facility to store it. India was also very keen to have reprocessing rights for spent nuclear fuel to be able to fund their fast breeder reactor program and to ultimately go to the third stage of the thorium-based plants. So that was an important consideration for India in its entry into nuclear commerce. I hope that answers John's question. Andrew has a question about the size of the demand for foreign nuclear suppliers, manufacturers such as valves, piping, insulation, waste treatment, cranes. Is there local competition, and is that becoming a barrier to entry? So there is nothing within the nuclear purchasing process in India that prohibits the purchase of overseas technology. The Indian customer is very much driven by value, and so if you have a solution that's more expensive, you have to prove how it will save them money in the long run by reduced maintenance, by reduced labor, whatever it is. They are very open to those kinds of discussions. They clearly have developed many of their own sources for procuring the pumps and valves and insulation and so on. But remember that most of the people supplying those products in India have just one customer, NPCIL. So they are not able to scale, they are not able to invest in R&D, they are not really able to produce something world-class. Whereas most of you on the phone are supplying not only to the Canadian or US economies, you're supplying to Argentina, you're supplying to Korea, you're supplying to other countries, and you're able to invest in R&D and improve technology and use things that are modern. So that's really what your leading card should be, is that how your product fills the needs of the Indian customer better than the solutions that they might have today. And if you do that, you will find a willing audience. Not everybody will win. Clearly, there will be an interaction and a discussion, and they have to see that the risk of bringing in a new supplier is overcome by the value that you provide. But this is a discussion that would be very fruitful and valuable to have. Dinesh, would you like to add to that?
No, I think you've covered it pretty well, Gunjan. I don't think there's anything else more to say on that subject.
I see. I see. Now, Bob, are you still on?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so there is a question here that I think might be more suited for you than for me, and I think it comes from someone within the Canadian government. What should be the model for OCI to facilitate its member companies to get business in India?
Well, I think, first of all, the model should be that I believe the Indian or the Canadian government should take a leading role, first of all. Canadian companies itself, individually, they cannot really penetrate into that market. It has to be a joint effort and probably spearheaded by the Canadian government. That's what I think would work.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think with John Baird's visit to India next month, some of those pieces are coming together, and we are very, excited to see that both the organization of Can-Do Industries as well as the group of nuclear utilities in India, the Can-Do organization, are very active in making this move forward. For my American friends on this call, there is considerable activity going on with the Department of Energy, working with India, with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, whose chairman visited India less than a year ago, and with the corresponding visits from India to the U.S. So there is activity going on, and we expect the commerce to follow soon. There's a question about smart modular reactor technology. So the India's stated plans talk about the so-called proven solutions around heavy water and light water reactors that are really in the 1,000 megawatt or 700 megawatt range. There are many locations in India that are off the grid today, and many of those would be better served by the small modular reactor technology. So in a sense, India's electrical energy ecosystem lends itself far more to the small modular reactor technology. No company has been able to convince India yet that that's the right way to go, but that's really, I think, because not enough effort has been made in that direction. So this is a thread that I would encourage people to pursue. It does take some time, and I know that most of the modular reactor technology companies are waiting for approvals, within the US or other systems. But at the same time, I think it's worthwhile pursuing a conversation, because it's very likely this is one of those cases where your first big win and your first installation might actually happen in India if you're able to make a good and strong case for it. So it's something definitely that is worth looking at. Some of these companies are funded by deep-pocketed venture or individual investors, and I think it's well worth it for them to look at an Indian installation at some point. There's a question about the details of Part 810, which is the U.S. export license process, and I would say that that's probably better asked of the U.S. Department of Commerce staff than Dinesh or me. So I'm going to skip over that. These are fairly technical issues, and most of you who have exported to other countries know that 810 and others apply to multiple countries. And the process for India is not that different. The question about environmental assessment opportunities to protect environment and health, and I assume they're talking about this within the context of nuclear energy. And Glenn, yes, absolutely, there are huge opportunities in India there, because as we talk to the people in India, these are areas where they feel that they are not really up to world-class standards. If you do some research, you will find that there have been minor incidents, not accidents, but minor incidents at many of the nuclear plants around the leakage of the heavy water or tritium in one case, and some minor incidents in terms of security breaches that they are much more concerned about now, given that India has a significant terrorist issue. So these are issues around both environment and security that I think are important, and India would be open to the idea of world-class solutions. And this ties in very well with the long-term plans in India. There's one final question I want to take. We are already several minutes over. Somebody is asking about the safeguarded reactor. I use that term, and basically a safeguarded reactor is defined as one where the International Atomic Energy Agency has the right to inspect it, where no uranium from that site will be taken for India's military purposes, and one that is then qualifies to be open for worldwide commerce. There are still sites that India considers non-safeguarded, where there may be some residual military activity going on, or where they want to ostensibly, and we don't have any special knowledge of this, where they want to have the right to take some of that enriched uranium and move it over to one of their strategic locations. So over time, they're going to release all of those, virtually all of those sites. But it's a phased process. Rajasthan is already safeguarded. Tarapur is safeguarded. I believe Kakrapar and perhaps Kaiga are going to be safeguarded soon. We understand that of course Kudankulam, the Russian reactor site, is safeguarded, but perhaps Kalpakkam will not be safeguarded for any time soon. But these are again, these are more tactical issues than strategic issues for most of you on the phone. So with that, let me round up the webinar. I think we've answered most of your questions. If I missed any, please email us, and we will try to take up the questions via email. Dinesh and I have really enjoyed this presentation, and Bob, thank you very much for the introductions and hosting us. At the end of this webinar, as you exit, I have a very short poll with just 3 quick questions that we'd like you to answer. So I recommend that you give us your feedback on how we can improve the performance next time around, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, Gunjan.
Okay, everyone have a good day.
Bye.